Alright guys, so this is an absolutely insane story that just developed over the last couple of days. Obviously, Gaza still remains to be one of the worst, if not the single worst, humanitarian crises on the face of the planet, due to Israel's relentless and brutal bombing campaign and invasion of the Gaza Strip, largely aided and abetted by the Joe Biden administration in the United States of America, who are now deciding to worsen this humanitarian crisis by cutting off funding to basically the major UN agency that is designated with facilitating aid to the people of Gaza, right? Which obviously you would think at a moment like this would be kind of important. I mean, we're talking about 90%, upwards of 90% of the population that is dealing with a dire hunger situation. We're dealing with almost the entirety of the population of Gaza being internally displaced, increases in the spread of disease, a lack of medical supplies, a lack of food and clean drinking water, everything you could possibly imagine being basically as worse, as bad as it can get, right? And so the Joe Biden administration is deciding to make this move based on allegations that came from the Israeli intelligence apparatus that some members of the UNRWA, the United Nations Reliefs and Works Agency, participated in one way or another. How so, we don't know. They haven't provided any evidence in October 7th, okay? That's the allegation that's been made. It's about 12 members that they're alleging. They've provided no evidence outside of, as we're going to talk about here, references to some interrogations that were done of Hamas members that were captured on October 7th. And the entire thing is dubious in so many different ways. Again, the lack of evidence that's been provided, the immediate cutting off of this aid, even if the allegations were true, is completely insane in my opinion. And then in addition to that, the timing of this was incredibly suspicious because this came out, this story dropped basically at the same time that the ICJ story dropped that was, obviously not a good look for Israel, that was finding that South Africa's case against them at the ICJ was plausible and that they're going to move forward with the charges of genocide or looking into the possibility of violations of the Genocide Convention. So this story drops immediately, the media picks it up, doesn't talk as much about the ICJ ruling. And so here are some of the details here. I got a lot to say about this. They say the UNRWA has fired the accused staffers and launched an investigation. The head of the UNRWA warned on Saturday that, quote, life-saving assistance is about to end due to the 9 countries' decision to suspend funding. And so it's Germany, Canada, the UK, the United Nations, and 6 other Western nations. They say the UNRWA is the primary humanitarian agency in Gaza with over 2 million people depending on it for their sheer survival. Right? Many are hungry as the clock is ticking towards a looming famine. The agency runs shelters for over 1 million people and provides food and primary health care even at the height of the hostilities. Right? Again, vitally important services being done here, regardless of what, even in the worst case scenario, if you take these allegations at face value, which you shouldn't, even if they were true, halting this funding is essentially condemning who knows how many people to death. Okay? They say a senior Israeli official said that Shin Bet, the Israeli, intelligence service and Israeli military intelligence, provided information that pointed to the active participation of some of these UNRWA staffers and the use of the agency's vehicles and facilities during the October 7th attack. They said, quote, this was strong and corroborated intelligence, the official said. A lot of the intelligence is a result of interrogations of militants who were arrested during the October 7th attack. Guys, I don't know the specifics on how these interrogations that they got this information from went, but Israel is not above using, let's say, methods of coercion, if you don't like the word torture, in order to get these kinds of confessions. So again, I don't know if this allegation is true. To me, it's almost irrelevant, right? But you're talking about most of the evidence, a lot of the evidence, as they admit here, coming from interrogations, which in all likelihood are coerced interrogations, right? So how reliable is that information going to be? I mean, it takes you back to like the early stages of the War on Terror days and the torture under the George W. Bush administration, where you go in, you torture people in these black sites, and they give you information because they want to end the torture or whatever mistreatment that you're subjecting them to, and they give you entirely unreliable information. So the idea that you take this kind of an allegation and use it to justify cutting aid to the major human rights organization that is capable of delivering aid to the Palestinians, it's psychopathic. And beyond that, Owen Jones made a good point that I'll touch on here in a minute. It might actually directly implicate the United States in the current ICJ trial, because one of those major demands that the ICJ made when ruling against Israel was you have to increase the facilitation of aid into Gaza because there's not enough aid getting in. Israel has been doing the opposite of that. They've been, incredibly, cumbersome in allowing any aid whatsoever into Gaza. You have Israeli citizens that I'm going to talk about here that have gone out of their way to go and block some of the aid from getting into Gaza. And now you have this. I mean, based on what? Based on allegations from the government of Israel that has been calling every single human rights organization on the face of the planet Hamas. They've been saying all the doctors in Gaza are Hamas, the hospitals are Hamas, the trees are Hamas. Everybody's Hamas, according to the government of Israel. And you are going to do this based on allegations from Shin Bet. I mean, it's crazy. But even if, again, the allegations are 100% true, we're talking about 12 people who are implicated from an agency that is made up of thousands and thousands of people. And you use that to justify cutting aid to 2 million Palestinians, right? As you are simultaneously continuing to give weapons and other material support to Israel after they have been committing widespread war crimes in broad daylight for over 100 days now. So Israel brazenly violates international law, commits widespread war crimes, arguably in the midst of a genocide, and we increase our funding to Israel. Okay, we increase our weapon shipments to Israel. And then you have 12 members of the UNRWA, according to Israeli intelligence, had some participation in October 7th and cut off the aid immediately. I mean, guys, it's so completely absurd. They say on Friday, the U.S. became the first country to pause its funding over the allegations. It was the first step by the Biden administration against the UNRWA since renewing U.S. funding to the agency after the Trump administration had previously completely cut it off. So, becoming more and more Trumpian as time goes on, right? State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, absolute demon, said the U.S. is extremely troubled by the allegations. Okay, you're extremely troubled by the allegations. Guys, how many videos have I shown you of Matthew Miller or John Kirby or any of these other State Department or Pentagon, spokespeople, these ghouls, who have been directly asked, hey, we just saw Israel level a university in a controlled demolition. What do you think about that? And they say, oh, either no comment or we're having conversations, important conversations with our Israeli friends behind the scenes. That's the most you get when Israel commits widespread war crimes in broad daylight on camera. They're never troubled. Oh, we're extremely troubled and we're going to do something about it. No accountability whatsoever for Israel, but immediate action when it comes to this dubious allegation. They say temporarily paused additional funding for the UNRWA while we review these allegations and the steps the United Nations is taking to address them. I mean, you're pausing the funding before you even know whether or not the allegation is true. Before you even know. And at the same time, as a reminder, as I've talked about on this channel, the Joe Biden administration and Congress recently, in a recent vote that took place, is refusing to even do an internal review to examine whether or not, or to do an official report as to whether or not Israel is in violation of human rights laws. So you won't even do an investigation into Israel, but you're going to cut off funding based on a mere allegation from Israel. So, I mean, that's basically the gist of what we know so far. I mean, again, there's no information here. There's no evidence here outside of like, hey, we interrogated a guy and he said this happened. That's it. That's what we're doing now, right? And again, the timing aspect of this, I think, is also very important, right? I mean, this dropped immediately when we found out what the ICJ's ruling was and that it was going to be, very critical of Israel, to say the least, right? And so now you have the United States, and the media dropping this story on that day. I mean, even just looking at this at surface level, when did they get the information? Because you said that this came from interrogations that were done by Hamas members who were captured on October 7th. I'm sorry, it's now January 28th. Did you just get that confession a couple of days ago when the ICJ ruling came out? That's a little bit coincidental, That's a little bit convenient that you just got that information, or were you holding this information for this day to try to delegitimize the United Nations and the ICJ by extension of that? I mean, it is so absurd, right? Again, even if it's true, it doesn't change my opinion on it whatsoever. You don't cut off aid. You don't engage in what is effectively collective punishment of the entirety of the 2 million people who need this aid. That's what you're doing. You're punishing the entirety of the Palestinian people for what? 12 people having some connection to October 7th? What are we talking about here? That's against international law to engage in that kind of collective punishment. I mean, again, it's pointed out here by Owen Jones, 13,000 Palestinians work for the UNRWA. These allegations are against 12 staff members, or 0.09%. And that's what they are, allegations based on Israeli interrogations of prisoners. This logic, if you followed it through, to its extent, would mean cutting off funding to every single agency on earth. And that's true. Maybe you'd start with Israel, right? Because we've had more than mere allegations of war crimes, right? I mean, that's at the core of this. That's what this is. You're cutting off funding to an agency because you're alleging that they were involved in committing war crimes on October 7th, right? If they did, then go after those individuals. You can go punish them. You can go bring them to trial for participation in war crimes. I'm not against that. That's totally fine. Hold them accountable. Don't punish the Palestinian people. But I mean, again, the logic of this, the underlying logic of this, 12 members of an organization. Oh, let's cut off the funding there while we figure out what's going on. Israel commits widespread war crimes in front of the entire world, documented on camera, irrefutable proof of them committing these war crimes. And you increase funding to them. Send them more weapons. I mean, he also said, I'd be interested to hear from the lawyers on this. Article 33 of the Geneva Convention, for a start, prohibits collective punishment. How is this not collective punishment? It's a good question. I think it absolutely is. And how is this compatible with the ICJ ruling that Israel must allow access to humanitarian aid? Another good question. Again, this is why I think this action could directly implicate every single one of these countries that just decided to reduce the amount of aid getting into the worst humanitarian crisis on the face of the planet that we are also responsible for causing in the first place, right? It's U.S. bombs that are dropping on the heads of Palestinians right now. We also had this here from Middle East Eye as a reminder. Back in January 4th of this year, Noga Arbel, a former Israeli official, called for the destruction of the UNRWA during a discussion in the Israeli parliament, saying straight up, it will be impossible to win the war if we do not destroy the UNRWA, and this destruction must begin immediately. I mean, this is also why we've seen so many, random allegations, unfounded allegations from the government of Israel, from Israeli politicians and officials and military members who are saying everybody is Hamas. Every UN agency is Hamas. The United Nations itself is Hamas. South Africa is Hamas. Everybody is Hamas. I mean, I even saw recently Benjamin Netanyahu put out a statement that was saying the families of the hostages that are being held in Gaza, okay, who've been protesting him for not getting some sort of a deal worked out, He came out with a statement even saying they are aiding and abetting Hamas. So now we're like one day away from the Israeli government under Netanyahu saying that the hostages and the families of the hostages are also Hamas. I mean, we've seen this over and over and over again, guys. We also had other examples of this just a couple years ago. 9 EU states reject Israeli terrorist designation for Palestinian NGOs. And this was part of like a sweeping outlay that was put out by Israel, where they were accusing all of these major Palestinian NGOs, these organizations, of being responsible for terrorism, of being terrorists themselves, terrorist organizations, right? And the goal of that is to destroy them, is to delegitimize them, is to, not allow them to push forward with their cause of helping Palestinians. And they rejected it because there's no fucking evidence for it. So it's not the first time that Israel has accused aid organizations or other human rights organizations of terrorism, right? Again, I don't know if the allegations are true. Maybe it is. Again, doesn't change my mind in any way, shape, or form. Hold those individuals accountable. You don't fucking punish the 2 million people of Gaza, right? So this has happened before. And again, as a reminder, I showed you guys recent videos of this before, but Israeli civilians, most likely working in coordination with the Israeli government or military, are going and protesting the aid that is supposed to be going into Gaza and bringing a halt to it, holding it up. Even further than the Israeli, the IDF has already been doing, blocking upwards of 70% of the aid. So over the last couple of days, there's been almost no aid that's been getting through to the people of Gaza, right? So, I mean, Jesus Christ, guys. I don't know how much lower the Joe Biden administration can stoop. I mean, what is the justification for this? What is the justification for this? Again, the timing of it, incredibly suspicious. The allegation itself, incredibly suspicious, where a vast majority of the evidence, the so-called evidence that you're bringing forward for this claim was based on coerced interrogation in all likelihood. I mean, that's clearly not enough. But even if it was true, we're talking about 12 members of a thousands and thousands strong organization that is the primary organization capable of helping to facilitate aid to the people of Gaza who need it more than anybody right now. And Biden making this decision, man, it is so beyond disgusting. Both from a moral perspective, also from a hypocrisy perspective, as he continues to fund and give weapons to Israel as they commit war crimes. I mean, There's those aspects of it. There's also the political aspect of it, which I'm probably going to cover in a different video here, where he's making all of these desperate ploys to try to reach out to Arab communities in swing states like Michigan, for example. And a lot of these leaders of, within Arab communities, Arab American communities here, are basically telling him to fuck off. And I mean, when you're doing shit like this, it's probably for good reason, right? You don't deserve their votes if this is what you're doing. In many cases, directly to some of their family members or people they know. So, I mean, again, there you go, guys. We'll see if there's any more evidence that comes forward, I guess. I doubt it. We'll see if anything else is any other updates to this. But, I mean, worsening the worst humanitarian crisis on the face of the planet that you were helping to cause in the first place, it doesn't get much lower than that.